today I'm going to show you start to finish how to make these Mocha Ganache macarons. Oftentimes I leave out things like whipping meringue or whatever, but I'm going to include absolutely everything that I can today. I'm starting off here. You see most of my tools. I have that 804 piping tip. I have a piping bag. This is a 16-inch. I have some coffee beans, and I'm going to start off by giving those a pretty coarse grind. You do not need to do this. I'm going to use these for decoration on top of my shells. You could buy already ground coffee. You could add sprinkles instead. You could leave the shells completely plain. It totally depends on your preference, what you want for the style, the texture, the flavor. I love coffee, so for me, the more I can squeeze into a macaron shell, the more I'm going to add in. All right, now that I've got that out of the way, I'm going to work on my macaron shells. As you may know, I really like to use the French method in my home kitchen. It is super easy, especially for really small batches, which I love. I am just starting off on a pretty low speed, something like a 2, 3, 4 on my KitchenAid. I don't always do the same thing. I go by feel. I don't really look at it. So I get a lot of requests for exactly what did you do for exactly how much time. That is not how I bake. I'm so sorry. So just start on a pretty low speed is my recommendation. I've just got the egg whites in here so far, and once those egg whites are starting to look frothy and they're looking a little bit more white, before they were kind of yellowy, translucent, and now it's looking like whitish foam. This is when I'm going to start adding in my sugar, and if you are going to add cream of tartar, I like to mix that in with the sugar and add that all in kind of as that goes in. If you want to, I know some people like to add in the cream of tartar right away. I don't always add it in. While I was in France, I didn't bother to buy any. If I'm traveling, I often don't really care about it so much. So it's not something that you absolutely need, but I do think it does help with the meringue development and with the stabilization. So I do think it is a good thing to add in. But if you don't have it, don't panic or freak out. It's okay. I'm going to slowly be adding in the sugar here. And as the sugar is almost completely incorporated, I might increase the speed on my mixer a little bit, maybe more like a 3, 4, 5 at this point. And the reason you don't want to dump in all the sugar at once is because you don't want it to just sink to the bottom of the bowl and kind of be one big lump of sugar. That's a lot harder to incorporate, and that is going to hurt the texture of your meringue. It's going to be harder to whip really nicely and easily. So absolutely, I recommend don't take an hour to add in your sugar, but don't do it all at once either. You want all of the sugar to be incorporated by the time you're seeing like soft to medium peaks. And I'm going to go to a pretty stiff peak with this meringue, which means when I stop the machine and I pull my whisk up, I want to see one stiff peak that is just going straight up. I don't want it flopping all over the place. I don't want it to be too soft, but I also don't like it to be really, really stiff and over whipped. If you're not entirely sure about what looks over whipped or under whipped, I have a whole series about what happens if I do XYZ with my macarons, and I have some videos talking more about that. So I'm looking for that stiff meringue. After I've incorporated the sugar, after I get to that kind of medium soft peak, I like to increase the speed of my mixer one last time, usually, and at this point I'm at like a 5 or a 6. I never go above that. You do not ever with macarons want to be on high speed. If you are adding in a colorant to your macarons, I really like to, if I'm just coloring the batter one color, I really like to add it in after the sugar is incorporated and before my meringue has finished whipping. So about like 70% of the way done, I will add in my gel or powdered food colorant. If you want to have white macarons like I'm doing today, or if you are dividing up your batter, just leave it, let it go, whip to that stiff peak. And once it is done, I'm going to transfer that meringue to another bowl to finish adding in the rest of the ingredients. All right, this is what it looks like when the meringue has reached that stiff peak stage, and I've transferred the meringue to a larger, wider bowl. That is going to help me a lot, both with mixing all those dry ingredients in, the almond flour and the powdered sugar that have been sifted together. And also it really helps me to visualize what's going on in the bottom of my bowl, everywhere in the bowl. If you just do this in your KitchenAid, I think it's a little bit easier to accidentally have some pocket of ingredients at the bottom that maybe isn't quite scooped up. So basically, no matter what size batch I'm making, I always transfer it out into a larger bowl. I'm going to be mixing the dry ingredients in about 2 to 4 additions. Usually for me, that averages out to 3. It's just a really easy number, I think, to stick with, but depending on the size of your batch and everything, you can obviously do what works best for you. The reason I'm adding in my dry ingredients in about 3 additions is because I really want to incorporate everything, and I do want to slightly deflate my meringue, but I don't want to completely deflate the meringue right now. So I don't want to overmix, especially at this early stage, because after I get all the ingredients together, then I will do what we call the macaronage, or, purposefully folding over and mixing the macaron batter to achieve that perfect texture. So right now in the beginning, I do want to mix and fold everything together. I don't have to be too careful, but I don't want it to take too long. So if you just dump everything in, it might take a little while longer and you might accidentally overmix while you're at it. So now that everything is incorporated, I don't have any weird pockets of meringue or dry ingredients. What I'm going to do, and this is why I really like to have a wider bowl, is I'm going to scrape my spatula along the sides of my bowl, scrape it through my batter, and then pull it over onto itself and kind of pull my spatula through the middle. This process, especially with pressing the batter against the side of your bowl, scraping it through, this really helps to ensure that you are working with all of the batter. You're mixing everything. There aren't any bits that are being left behind, and you are deflating the air in the meringue equally, evenly, and to the right extent. What I'm looking for here is that when I pull my spatula up, the batter will drip down in a way that looks like a ribbon. So people often call that the ribbon stage, because it should look like one ribbon flowing from the spatula back down into the bowl, and after about 30 seconds that batter should smooth out a bit and kind of reincorporate into the batter instead of leaving these thick tracks on top of the batter. So you don't want to mix too little and have all the batter just sticking to your spatula. And you also don't want to mix too much and have everything flowing like water way too quickly. So once you reach that ribbon stage, you can transfer the batter to your bag with your piping tip. I have a template and then a silpat here, and then I also have a nice flat tray that I will use to tap the bottom, just to get rid of any air bubbles and smooth out the tops. And then I also have those ground up coffee beans from before for decoration. As far as piping goes, it's really important to remember to pipe with your piping bag at a 90-degree angle to the table, to the silpat. Pipe straight down for a couple of seconds and then release the pressure in your wrist and use your hand and wrist to kind of make a swirling motion that will help cut off any of the batter that's coming out of your piping bag and will give you as smooth a top as possible. If you have reached that perfect stage with your macaron batter, the tops of the macarons should smooth out really nicely, especially with tapping your trays. But if it is a little bit too stiff, if you pull straight up especially, you might end up with pretty bumpy shells, and that's why it's really important. Additionally, if you are piping at an angle, that is something that can lead to lopsided shells in the oven, so that is really important to make sure you're piping straight up and down. So I've just transferred the silpat to the top of my baking sheet. I'm just going to tap my tray a couple times, and then I'm going to put it back onto my counter. Some people like to leave it on the sheet pan that they're working with. I really like to keep it flat on my counter for as long as possible. So when I'm not filming, that's usually what I do on my kitchen counter. If you are adding anything to the top, like these ground up coffee beans or anything else, make sure to do it after you've tapped your tray and before it forms the skin or dries out on top. That will ensure that A, it doesn't go flying everywhere, and B, it will stick to the macaron shell. If you wait too long and the top begins to dry and form that skin, it will not stick. So after you bake your macarons, everything will just fall right off. Here is another little glimpse of that piping process from the side. And after I get everything piped and sprinkled, I'm going to leave them just on my counter, room temperature, everything's normal, for about 20-25 minutes, though that might be longer or shorter for you in your kitchen, and then bake them at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for about 16 to 18 minutes. While those macarons are baking and cooling, I am going to quickly make a mocha ganache. If you've seen me make any ganache before, you might know that I really like to use a mixture of dark and milk chocolate, and I like to always use honey, or you could use any inverted sugar. So I'm going to put some salt and then the honey, or again, inverted sugar, into the bowl with my chocolates. If you want to play around, add completely dark chocolate. If you want to add more milk chocolate, you can. But personally, I like the taste of adding the mixture of both in this quantity. I have some cream and I have some espresso that I am going to heat up in my microwave, along with a little bit of instant espresso powder. If you only have the instant espresso powder, you absolutely can use just that. Or if you want to use just the espresso, that's fine too. As soon as it is at a scald, I'm going to pour that over the chocolates, honey, and salt. After a couple seconds, I'll give that a good whisk to make sure everything is incorporated, nothing is at the bottom or kind of left out of this mixture. And then I will add in the butter at the very end. Though I do often just use a whisk in this first stage, I think using an immersion blender is super important to get the best texture and the best results. So oftentimes after this first kind of whisking of all the ingredients together, I will change out my whisk for the immersion blender and just give that a quick little mix. It is important with an immersion blender to kind of give it a little shake. Make sure there's not too much air trapped under it, or you will end up with a ton of bubbles. For something like a macaron filling, that's not too much of a big deal, but for other pastries it might be. So it's always a good practice to try to reduce the amount of bubbles if you can. For this chocolate ganache, it would not be the end of the world if you only used a whisk. But again, I think using an immersion blender does provide the best overall texture in the end, so I highly, highly recommend it. I'm just going to cover this with plastic wrap and leave it at room temperature until it cools completely before digging into it. Before I fill these shells, I just wanted to show you that a good macaron shell should be firm on the top. You shouldn't be able to stick your finger into it, and it should be just slightly soft on the bottom. You should be able to create a little dent with your thumb or finger, but you should not be able to press completely through it with ease. I'm just going to break this open so you can see what the inside looks like. There is a kind of tiny bit of a little gap at the very top between the top shell and kind of the meaty part on the inside. Some people freak out about that. I think it is absolutely absurd to freak out about it. It does not bother me in the slightest. And once that is matured, it will go away. So if that happens to you and you're panicking, please do not. It is not a problem. All right, my ganache is cool, so I'm just going to scoop this up into my piping bag and then fill my macarons. Today I am just using this ganache for the filling. It is 100% this Mocha ganache. I think it's really lovely. I think it's a really good, simple macaron to have. But I also think that ganache is really wonderful when you pair it with something else on the inside, or if you have a buttercream on the outside and ganache on the inside. I really love, as you've probably noticed, playing around with different combinations of things. So this ganache, this Mocha ganache, I think is something that can be really versatile, that you can pair with or use with other things. You don't have to just do the ganache in these macaron shells, though it is absolutely delicious just as it is. The ground up coffee beans add some really nice texture, a really nice visual to these shells, and also a great burst of extra coffee flavor in addition to that Mocha ganache. I really hope you enjoyed this start to finish, hopefully really intensive macaron tutorial. I know it was a bit long, but if you are someone who has been looking for maybe more information, more of a visual on meringue or filling or whatever, I hope this was really helpful for you. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought, and if you really like this style of showing everything for a macaron, what other flavors would you like to see filmed this way? All right, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Until then, have a wonderful day. Bye.